Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Alchemist. Tonight we follow the scent of candle wax and wet stone through the crumbling walls of an abbey older than most trees. We trail muddy footprints down into a dark cellar where secrets hum behind wooden barrels. Tonight we begin the tale of a boy who, believe it or not, learned to turn water into silver. Sounds impressive, right? You probably want to know this isn't a happily ever after sort of tale. Because silver, as you'll see, has a nasty habit of poisoning everything it touches, especially hope. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Rain clawed at the old roof tiles of St. Brannock's Abbey. The wind groaned through the stone arches like a tired beast. And inside the stable, the boy, he had no surname anyone used, was elbow-deep in hay and manure. He'd been left with the name Milo, short and forgettable, like the stains on his tunic. The monks rarely spoke to him. He slept in a loft above the goats and earned his meals by cleaning what others stepped over. That night, as thunder rolled over the hills, Brother Elric sent Milo below to fetch a bundle of firewood from the old store, not the fresh split, so Milo took a candle stub, descended the wet stairs past the kitchens, and pressed into a room that smelled of mildew and prayers. The abbey cellar wasn't meant for visitors. It was a forgotten place, where crates sagged, scrolls lay rotting in bins, and tools rusted into the wood of old tables. Some said it had once been a scriptorium, but no one copied texts anymore. Milo didn't expect to find anything unusual, just logs and maybe a few weevils. But when he shifted a stack of rotting kindling, the floor gave a muffled thunk beneath his heel. He knelt, a loose flagstone. Of course, he looked around first. The monks said God watched all things, but even God would struggle to see into this damp pit of forgotten candles. Milo pried at the edge, fingers scraping stone, until the slab lifted with a creak like breaking teeth. Beneath lay a bundle wrapped in waxcloth, bound in a seal that had long since cracked apart. He pulled it out. Not wood, not food, a scroll, heavy, wrapped in pale leather that hadn't yellowed with time. It shimmered faintly, like frost on a winter window. The symbols across the cover weren't Latin, at least not in the way he'd learned from eavesdropping at lessons. Spirals and stars, strange crescents looped in on themselves. It might have been Arabic, or Greek, or something older, something no longer spoken. He took it anyway. Firewood forgotten. Back in the hayloft, under the scratching of mice and the occasional grunt from a sleeping sow, Milo unrolled the scroll atop a feed sack. It uncurled slowly, creaking, as if it resented the light. The ink shimmered faintly red, though he'd swear it turned green when the wind stirred the candle. The central diagram depicted a fountain pouring into a bowl. One spout led to a sun, the other to a coin. Beneath, a figure knelt beside a well. Around the edge, the writing twisted in circles. He traced it with his finger. Heat pulsed up his arm. He yelped, snatching back his hand. But the candle hadn't moved, and the parchment remained still. No burn, no mark, just a slight warmth in his fingertips, like the feeling after a good rub between wool and skin. Curiosity has doomed better men than Milo. He didn't sleep that night. By the glow of his candle and the occasional drip from the leaking roof, he sketched what he could understand onto torn bits of sackcloth, ratios, symbols, and a phrase that repeated like a chant, "What is pure flows downward. What shines must bleed." No one in the abbey had mentioned alchemy. They studied scripture, not science. But he'd heard the baker talk about it once, some travelling friar who claimed monks in Egypt could turn sand into glass, or glass into gold, using only salt, fire, and prayer. At the time, the baker called it kitchen sorcery. But Milo knew better. He'd once watched Elric clean a chalice with crushed mint and vinegar, muttering prayers that sounded suspiciously like recipes. Outside, the storm passed. Dawn broke in streaks of copper and pearl, but Milo didn't notice. He was drawing again, calculating, trying to match the star-like mark at the top of the scroll with a symbol he thought might represent quicklime. By breakfast, he'd memorized half the page. Of course, Most medieval scholars believed alchemy to be equal parts heresy and foolishness, but not all. In fact, in the 14th century, King Edward III had reportedly invited alchemists to his court, hoping one might fund his wars by brewing gold. Historians still argue whether any of them succeeded, or if they simply charmed the king out of his coin. As for fringe tidbits, some monks, particularly in Germanic regions, believed alchemy was a form of divine mimicry. God created man from dust, so why shouldn't man try to create silver from spring water? Milo didn't care about kings or divine mimicry. He just knew the scroll made his fingertips tingle, and he wanted deeply to know why. And somewhere beneath the abbey, the well sat quietly, water still and dark, waiting. The scroll didn't sleep, neither did Milo. In the nights that followed, he grew reckless, sneaking handfuls of wax, broken quills and stolen ink from the monk's study hall. The script inside the scroll was unlike anything he'd seen scratched into prayer books. Some symbols resembled Hebrew, others mirrored constellations. It took him 3 days just to figure out that certain marks only glowed when breathed upon, revealing diagrams tucked within diagrams, like ink that needed the warmth of life to show itself. His chores suffered. Brother Elric gave him a cuff to the ear for forgetting to scrub the milk buckets. But Milo barely noticed. His mind was trapped in circles and tinctures and odd instructions like steep bone in vinegar until the marrow sings, grind frost root before dawn, never after. The last one was a mystery. What in the name of Saint Bertwald was a frost root? But there was one phrase that stood out, its letters burning even when the candle sputtered low. A thing becomes precious when it forgets its source. It sounded poetic. Milo didn't care much for poetry, but that line, it wormed into his thoughts, like ivy through a crack in the stone. The next evening, in the fading slats of light from the stable windows, Milo decided to try one of the simpler rituals. According to a side panel on the scroll, there was a basic transmutation involving plant fiber, ash, and something called green vitriol. He didn't know what that was, exactly, but the recipe mentioned its scent resembled rotten eggs and rust. That rang a bell. Sulphur. The abbey's latrine pit stank of it, and he remembered Brother Amos pouring something over the chamber pots to keep the smell down. A small blue glass bottle tucked near the cellar's herb wall. That night, under the guise of fetching more straw for the mules, Milo nicked the bottle and 3 lumps of soft charcoal. He returned to the loft, lit his candle stub, and whispered the lines as he worked, grinding, mixing, folding hay into paste with water and sulphur as instructed. The scroll said to press the mix beneath a flat stone and leave it overnight. He did. At dawn, the paste was no longer golden brown. It had turned grey, silvery grey, like riverstone polished by years of water. He let out a small, incredulous laugh. It worked, sort of. The hay hadn't turned to silver, but it wasn't hay anymore. It crackled under his touch like old bark, and smelled faintly metallic. He rushed to repeat it, adjusting the ratio, more sulphur, less ash. A prayer muttered under his breath, not out of piety, but habit. Candle smoke swirled above the scroll. The diagrams seemed to watch him. The ink felt alive, flexing as the light moved. He didn't sleep for 2 days. Eventually his hands began to tremble, not from fear or fatigue, but anticipation. He was learning something ancient, something forgotten. One morning, Brother Elric stopped him outside the chapel. "You look like you've been up all night chasing demons," the monk said, eyeing his pale face and grey-stained fingers. "Just rats in the hay, brother," Milo replied. "Kept me up, scratching." The monk snorted. "Should let the cats sleep in your bed. Might scare them off." Milo nodded and walked away quickly. No one suspected yet, but it wouldn't last. By the end of the week, his hands smelled faintly of smoke and vinegar. He wrapped them in old cloth to avoid notice. The scroll had opened 3 more folds, cleverly hidden seams he'd missed before. One revealed a table of planetary symbols: Mercury, gold, iron. He recognized some from his stolen glances at Brother Amos's medicinal charts. It was becoming clear the scroll was no mere curiosity. It was a guide, a map, not to treasure, but to transformation. One passage referenced a vessel of life turned mirror, Another spoke of a mouthless guardian that drinks the moon. The language was poetic, veiled, but when paired with drawings of wells, chalices, and what looked suspiciously like water jugs, it didn't take long to connect the dots. It was talking about the village well, the same well that sat beneath the abbey's eastern wall, the one that fed every pot, every pail, every kettle from St. Brannock's to the tannery yard. A historical fact for you: medieval villages centered around wells, not just for water but for gathering, gossip, and ritual. In some parts of Ireland, wells were considered sacred, blessed by saints, and occasionally believed to hold healing powers. Offerings were tossed in pins, buttons, even locks of hair. Historians still argue whether these wells truly carried folklore magic, or if it was just the result of local minerals affecting the taste and, occasionally, health. Some claim holy wells had natural lithium or copper traces, which altered mood and gave a false sense of divine blessing. As for fringe beliefs, there's an old French superstition that silver placed in a well would charm the water, purify it, or invite the moon's favor. Some folk even dropped silver rings into newborns' wash basins for luck. Milo didn't know any of that, but the scroll knew something. Its last revealed passage, scrawled between two layers of curling parchment, read, "Let the vessel drink the sky, let silver root where none dared plant." It was a recipe, a ritual, and it involved water. A thimble of blood, 3 shavings of bone, quicklime, vinegar, and something that shimmered blue in firelight. It was too much to try all at once, but he had already memorized the first part. He could see it when he blinked. Late that night, he stood by the well, a wax-sealed jar in his arms. Inside, the result of 3 weeks' work, the mixture swirled faintly, like oil in broth. The moon sat low and heavy over the abbey roof. He whispered the chant. He poured. The mixture hissed as it hit the surface. Then silence. The boy waited. Nothing changed, except the taste in the air, a faint copper tang, and the odd sensation that the stars had blinked. He didn't know it yet, but something deep below had stirred. Milo didn't sleep after that. He tried. He returned to the loft, curled under his thin blanket, and stared up at the slanted beams where the mice ran their quiet marathons. But something in his chest hummed, not like fear, not exactly, more like anticipation drawn tight, like a bowstring about to snap. By morning, the air around the abbey felt different, not enough to alarm the monks, just a subtle shift. The birds didn't sing as much. The well's stone rim had a faint gleam, like someone had scrubbed it during the night, but only Milo noticed. Brother Elric sent him with 2 empty buckets. He approached the well like a thief returning to the scene. The pulley creaked, unchanged. The rope was damp and slightly stiff from the rain 2 nights before. As he lowered the wooden pail, his fingers tingled, exactly like they had when he first touched the scroll. The bucket splashed. He cranked it up, and there it was, the water, clear, cool, harmless looking, until the sun hit it. It glinted, not like a normal reflection, but in a way that seemed too sharp, like light had been caught inside, like the surface itself was a mirror. Milo leaned closer and saw his own face staring back, pale, tired, and almost smirking. He dipped a finger in, the chill bit harder than usual. When he pulled it out, the droplet on his fingertips sparkled silver before dripping away. He glanced around. No one saw. He didn't drink it. Not yet. Instead, he returned the buckets and listened, as Brother Elric muttered, "Bit of a shine to it today. Must have been the moon." The monks didn't question it. Not then. That afternoon, the well served water to half the village. Buckets carried on bent shoulders, ladled into soups, stirred into dough, splashed over the foreheads of crying children, and no one noticed the taste, at least not at first. But Milo did. He stole a sip from the cook's kettle while her back was turned. The water touched his tongue like winter metal. It didn't sting, but it lingered, a faint, numbing sweetness. It reminded him of the time he accidentally licked the tip of a pewter spoon that had been resting in the fire. He rushed back to the scroll that night. It had uncurled again. A new section exposed itself. Diagrams of a tree made of veins, roots curling into an underground reservoir, its leaves shaped like coins. A phrase shimmered faintly at the center: "Beware what drinks too deep of the mirrored spring." and below a sketched figure kneeling before a well, hands outstretched, face turned skyward. His eyes were hollow, his mouth was open. By now, Milo didn't question how the scroll knew. It just did. It revealed what it wanted. And now, it wanted him to see the price. The next morning, something odd happened at the bakery. Old Brecht, the flour-dusted man who grumbled through every sunrise loaf, dipped his ladle into the well and blinked at it. "Odd colour this morning," he muttered. "Looks like moonshine." His daughter tasted the water. "Tastes clean," she said. "Clean like a mint leaf." She shrugged and poured it into the kneading trough. By midday, their rolls were sweeter, crusts crisped with a strange shimmer. Customers lined up. Brecht laughed. "Must be the spring air." He had no idea that one of the coins he dropped in his apron later stuck to the table, as if drawn magnetically, as if kissed by something no coin should be. By nightfall, 3 people had commented that the well water made their tea brighter, and a little boy swore it made his teeth sparkle when he smiled. Milo watched it all from the stable yard, eyes wide, thoughts racing, heart pounding. What had he done? Now, a little history for the sleepy minds. Alchemists of the Middle Ages were rarely the pointy-hat sorcerers stories pretend they were. Many were methodical, obsessed with distillation, fermentation, purification. In fact, medieval Islamic scholars pioneered techniques for mineral extraction that modern chemists still recognize. And here's the quirky bit. Some of them believed metals had lifespans. That gold was the oldest, the most perfect metal, and lead the youngest. That metals grew in the ground, like plants, maturing over centuries. Historians still argue whether this belief was metaphorical or literal, whether alchemists truly thought silver grew from mercury like a tree, or if it was just symbolism for transformation. Back in the village, symbols were becoming real. By the week's end, more strange things crept into everyday life. A man's brass buttons turned dark around the edges. A toothless beggar claimed the water gave him back his sense of smell. One girl insisted she could hear music in it if she held a cup up to her ear. Of course, not everyone noticed. That's the thing about magic or whatever this was. It begins subtly. It weaves itself into the ordinary. But Milo noticed everything. He began documenting symptoms. Not physical ones. Not yet. Just effects. Bread lasted longer. Milk spoiled slower. Horses drank greedily, but seemed restless. Even the abbey cat stared into the well for long minutes at a time, as if waiting for something to surface. One night, Milo couldn't help himself. He returned to the well, alone again, scroll tucked beneath his tunic. This time, he lowered a small glass vial, tied to a bit of string, dipped it, drew it up. Under the moon, the vial looked like it held molten coin. It wasn't silver, not exactly, but it shimmered in that way, the way silver does when polished with ash, soft and seductive. He held it up to the candle in the loft. The liquid moved like it had weight, like it was trying to remember being metal. And then, just as he turned away, the vial sang, only for a moment, a single clear note, like glass struck gently. A tone that made his skin crawl with awe. He dropped the vial. It didn't shatter. It landed in straw. But the note lingered. He sat for hours, staring at it, as if waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. But something had changed. Milo felt it. The scroll pulsed faintly in the corner of his vision, even when closed, like it was awake now. And beneath the abbey, the water glowed softly in the dark, waiting for more. The first knock came just past midnight. Milo sat awake in the loft, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of goat and damp straw. The scroll opens in front of him. He was trying to decipher a particularly troublesome line, something about cracking the moon's egg, which sounded more like a riddle than chemistry, when a sound rose above the wind, a single knock, then silence. He froze. The stable didn't get visitors, especially not at night. He crept to the narrow slit in the wall, one eye peering out over the stable yard. A lantern flickered at the edge of the trees. Someone stood at the abbey gate. He waited. A second knock, slower this time, less like a request, more like a reminder. Then a voice, muffled but distinct, for the one who stirred the spring, Milo's breath caught. He pressed himself flat against the wood. No one moved outside. The figure had gone. The lantern, too. Morning came with the usual bustle of hooves and braying. Brother Elric shouted about the pigs again, and the monks lined up for porridge that tasted faintly of dust. Milo said nothing. But later that day, he heard a monk grumble that the bell rope had been tampered with, frayed at the top. Like someone climbed it, he said, squinting at the abbey tower. Not a soul up there all week. Then the cook claimed her stew pot boiled over, despite the fire being out. Little things. Things that might be nothing, or everything. That night, Milo slipped out with a lantern and a slingshot tucked into his belt, more charm than weapon. The gate creaked as he pushed it open. Moonlight painted the stones in pale frost. He didn't have to wait long. The figure stepped from the trees like smoke solidifying. Hood drawn, not tall, but not hunched like a monk. Hands gloved. "You are the one," the stranger said. The voice was low, neither harsh nor kind. "You opened the scroll." Milo said nothing. The stranger held up a hand, not threatening, just indicating silence. "You've stirred something that was meant to sleep. The water is not yours to shape." The stable boy's fingers clenched. "Who are you?" "Someone who knew the man who wrote that scroll." That shook him. "It's just ink and parchment," Milo said, his voice unsure even as it left his mouth. The figure stepped closer. "No, boy. It's a mirror, a language for waking stone and metal, and it does not forget." Milo's mind spun. "Why is it in the abbey cellar?" "Because someone buried it. Someone wiser than you." The wind kicked up. The figure turned, cloak catching the breeze like wings. "The well will give," the stranger said. "Until it takes, that is its nature." Then, without another word, the stranger slipped back into the forest. Milo didn't follow. Back in the loft, his hands trembled as he rolled the scroll shut. The symbols no longer shimmered. They looked dull, tired, like the page had aged 20 years in an hour. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he stared into the vial of silver-touched water, wondering just how deep he'd sunk. There's a historical quirk worth mentioning here. Many medieval texts were intentionally booby-trapped, metaphorically of course. Alchemical writings especially. Authors wrote in code, used symbols for measurements that changed from one paragraph to the next, and scattered misleading ingredients to ward off the uninitiated. Some even left curses at the beginning. "Whosoever reads this and is not worthy shall lose their tongue," that sort of thing. Historians still argue whether these warnings were spiritual threats or just academic gatekeeping. Either way, Milo had skipped all that. He had opened the scroll without knowing its author, without understanding its purpose, and now strangers were knocking in the night. Still, curiosity pressed on. The next day, he eavesdropped on Brother Amos in the apothecary as he muttered over herbs. "Madder roots changed again," the monk said, holding up a jar, "and the comfrey's gone stiff." "Stiff?" Another monk asked. "Like it's been soaked in salt, but it hasn't." Outside, two boys dared each other to drink from the well straight. One did. He giggled, saying it tasted like metal snow, then promptly vomited. His friend laughed until his nose started bleeding. They both ran off, giddy and confused. Milo felt a cold weight settle in his belly. He returned to the scroll that evening. More pages had shifted. Some words had faded entirely, replaced with strange circles burned directly into the parchment. No ink, just scorch marks. One image showed a man with veins branching from his chest like tree roots. His eyes were gone, and in their place coins. His mouth dripped silver. The caption read, "He drank what was not his to take." Milo couldn't look at it long. That night, he dreamt of water running uphill, and when he woke, there was a single silver coin resting on his pillow. He hadn't placed it there. For context, silver coins in the 14th century were often touched by priests before being used in deals of questionable morality, land disputes, marriage annulments, and even plague offerings. People believed silver absorbed sin, but some old folk tales warned that silver placed where one slept was an invitation for spirits, for dreams, for change. Fringe idea. Maybe. But Milo didn't touch the coin. He wrapped it in cloth and buried it beneath a loose board in the goat stall. 3 goats refused to eat for 2 days. Something had shifted again, and the scroll remained quiet. For now, the apothecary smelled different. It always carried the usual scents: dried rosemary, vinegar, and the underlying musk of damp wood. But now, when Milo ducked inside to look for fleas on the cats, as he told Brother Amos, there was a new aroma, something metallic, clean, and oddly sweet, like blood on warm iron. He lingered near the shelves, pretending to adjust the baskets of nettle and crushed bark. What he was really doing was scanning for ingredients. The scroll had mentioned several obscure items he hadn't yet seen: dragon's eye, powdered bone glass, salt of copper. Most didn't exist in the monk's tidy jars. A squat blue flask with the words Vitriolum Verde painted in fading ink. Green vitriol, iron 2 sulfate, we'd call it today. Medieval folk used it to treat wounds, clean metal, and occasionally dye wool. Alchemists, though, they loved it. It was volatile. It fizzed when mixed with vinegar. It changed color depending on the moonlight. Some even believed it carried the seed of transformation. Milo slipped it into his tunic. He hated the lie he'd have to tell later, but he couldn't help himself. The scroll called, and its demands grew bolder. In the loft that night, he prepared the mixture carefully. Green vitriol, water from the well, and a pinch of salt stolen from the cellar's brining vat. As he stirred, the solution hissed and turned cloudy. When he added heat, just a bit from his candle stub, it turned a pale silver, nearly glowing. He dropped in a chicken bone. The reaction was immediate. A sharp crackle, then a shimmer spreading through the liquid like frost across a window pane. When he fished the bone out with tongs, it looked different, darker, denser, and disturbingly heavier, almost metallic. He tapped it against the stone wall. Clink. He swallowed hard. The next day he buried the bone behind the abbey, not sure whether to be proud or horrified. He'd transmuted something. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to know the scroll wasn't lying. And yet, people in the village were starting to look different. Brother Amos's skin had developed a strange sheen, like light danced across it in pearlescent ripples. The baker's daughter no longer blinked when flour got in her eyes, and the abbot himself, normally frail and stooped, was seen lifting a full barrel of grain as if it were nothing. "God has blessed us," Brother Elric muttered. Milo wasn't so sure. Then came the day of the blood-soaked rag. He found it at the well, tucked beneath the stone lip, fresh, no note, just a deep red stain across linen, folded neatly like a gift. He didn't touch it, just stared. Later that night, the scroll revealed another warning, curled along the margin like ivy. Salt and blood and ink, these bind the mirror shut. Ink he had, salt, too, blood. Well, that seemed to be arriving on its own. That's when he realized others might know. Someone else had found the scroll before him. Maybe long ago, maybe recently. Someone had tried this before. Historically speaking, it's worth noting that monasteries in medieval Europe often housed not just books and relics, but experimental records. Monks were among the first to record attempts at fermentation, distillation, and even rudimentary chemistry. But some texts were locked away, not for being dangerous, but for being tempting. Anything promising unnatural knowledge risked being branded heretical. Historians still argue whether certain abbeys truly engaged in alchemy, or if those were just accusations thrown by rival sects or suspicious nobles. And fringe believers whisper that some monasteries weren't hiding heresy, but protecting the world from something worse. Milo began to believe that, especially after what happened to old Renna. She was the town's herbalist, sharp-tongued, sharp-eyed, and too clever for most. One morning she was found on her stoop, staring at her reflection in a bowl of water, dead. No wounds, no signs of poison, just still. Her fingers were silver at the tips. The townsfolk murmured about her age. She was nearly 90, someone said, but Milo had seen her 2 days prior, climbing trees like a girl of 20. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he revisited the scroll. One section now bled through to the back of the parchment, words written so dark they seemed scorched into it. He held it up to the candlelight. A phrase emerged: "The vessel corrupts when it is praised." Strange. He thought of the baker who said the bread had never risen higher, of the village priest calling the well a gift from on high. Of the coins people had started tossing into it again, like a wishing fountain. Were they feeding it? He couldn't know for sure. But that week, villagers began using the water more greedily. Farmers filled barrels to bring to their livestock. Washerwomen swore the water now lifted stains without soap. Even the monks, skeptical at first, now crossed themselves before drawing a ladleful, just in case. And through it all, Milo kept experimenting, testing, brewing. He created a new paste that caused iron nails to flake like ash. He dissolved a fish scale into translucent sludge that smelled of mint. Every success made his heart race. Every failure left a whisper in his ear, soft as silk. He tried not to listen, but one night the scroll whispered back. Not with words, not even on paper. It simply unfurled, without touch, and revealed a drawing of a man sinking into a pool of mirrored water. Above him, the moon. Below, a silver tree growing from his chest. The caption read, "What you seek will bloom in your ruin." Milo blinked. The words pulsed once, then faded. The scroll curled closed on its own, and outside the village bell rang, but no one had pulled the rope. It started with a rat. They always scurried about in the loft, fat from grain and fearless from familiarity. Milo had come to know them by sound, tiny claws clicking over beams, the rhythmic rustle of straw nests. But this one was different. He'd left out a shard of bread soaked in the well's water, part experiment, part morbid curiosity. When the rat found it, it didn't nibble. It devoured the morsel with a single, jerking swallow, eyes bulging. Then it sat, motionless, for several minutes. Milo watched from the shadows, barely breathing. The rat's fur began to twitch. Not in the usual scrappy way of a grooming rodent, but like something moved beneath the skin. The belly swelled, the paws trembled, and then its blood shimmered through the thin pink of its ears and the translucent webbing between its toes. Milo could see something gleaming, silver, liquid, pulsing faintly with each heartbeat. He leaned closer, fascinated, horrified. The rat blinked once, then collapsed. No struggle, no squeal. Just done. Its body slumped into the straw, tiny limbs twitching once and stilled. By morning, it was gone. No corpse, no blood, only a faint silver ring in the straw where it had lain. He searched for it frantically, overturned every handful of hay, even looked outside, in case a cat had dragged it away. But nothing. Just that shimmering outline, slowly fading like frost under breath. He returned to the scroll with shaking hands. It greeted him with a new image, a rodent-like creature suspended mid-air, veins exposed, each one filled with silver lines. Around it, small black glyphs spiraled inward, almost pulsing. A phrase beneath the drawing read, "Life accepts silver only once, then it vanishes." He sat in silence for hours, the candle burning low beside him. The meaning was clear. Whatever silver this was, whatever the water had become, it wasn't sustaining, it was seductive. A flame too bright for the moth. He remembered the old saying Brother Elric had once muttered after a botched ink recipe. Even saints can drink poison if it tastes like wine. It stuck with him now, in a way it hadn't before. Meanwhile, the village was celebrating. The blacksmith's wife claimed her aching joints had stopped hurting. A merchant passing through declared the local wine tasted 10 years finer when mixed with well water. Word had begun to spread. People from neighboring farms came to taste it. One nobleman, visiting his sister, asked the abbot if he could have a barrel transported back to his manor. "Something's in it," he said, "something holy." The monks preened at the praise. Milo clenched his fists. They couldn't see it. What he saw, what he knew. The scroll didn't lie. The rat was proof. And now they were drinking death, drop by gleaming drop. But he said nothing. He told himself he needed more evidence, more tests. That evening he caught another rat. This time he placed it in a small wire cage. He prepared the same mixture, well water and a tincture from the scroll, labeled Salt of Becoming. He wasn't sure what it really was. It smelled like vinegar left too long beside rusted coins. He gave the rat a single drop. It squealed as the drop hit its tongue. Then silence. Its fur darkened. Its eyes gleamed briefly with a milky shine, and then it vanished. Not collapsed, Not died, vanished, not a trace left. The cage remained closed, no exit, no hole, just a single silver hair curling at the base of the wire floor. He backed away from the cage, heart hammering. The scroll had opened too far, too fast. He was losing control. A historical footnote for your drifting mind. Silver was once believed to ward off illness, evil, and the devil's tongue. Kings ate from silver dishes to avoid poisoning. Plagues were blamed on tainted metals, a theory both brilliant and wildly wrong. But here's the twist. Some monks believed silver remembered, that it retained the soul print of what it touched, which meant that silver born of death carried death's echo. Historians still argue whether this was mysticism or metaphor, but the idea remains: silver that gleams too brightly may not be silver at all. The next day, the baker's hands turned grey. Not fully, just the fingertips. He came to the abbey seeking balm. Brother Amos applied a salve. Frostbite, he said uncertainly, though it hasn't snowed. The baker laughed nervously. Only frost I've touched is in my water jug. Later, the stable boy overheard the monks whispering about pale fingers and shadows in the wash basin. That night, Milo watched from the loft as townsfolk dropped coins into the well, not for wishes, for thanks, for blessings, for more. They had begun treating it like a holy relic. He nearly screamed. Instead, he returned to his work. He brewed a reversal, charcoal, blessed salt, wormwood. He poured it into the well when no one watched. Nothing changed. The scroll curled tightly for 3 days. When it finally opened again, the new passage read, "The silver is awake. It will not sleep again." Outside, a child giggled and declared his pea sparkled like treasure. The boy's mother clapped her hands in delight, and Milo, up in the hayloft, began to cry. The first to taste it was Brother Elric. He knelt by the well on a bright morning, cupped his palms and drank deeply. "Cleanses the mind," he said afterward, voice unusually smooth, like warmed honey. "I've had headaches all week, and now, nothing." His pupils were larger. Milo noticed that. Almost too dark, too still. Within the hour, half the abbey followed suit. The scroll hadn't opened again, not since the last warning. Milo kept checking it, kept whispering to it, even pricked his finger and let a single drop fall onto the parchment's edge. Nothing. But the well, oh, it was thriving. Children chased each other barefoot, shouting that they were faster now. The butcher bragged his cleaver hadn't dulled in days. A woodcarver, famous for shaking hands, held his tools steady for the first time in months. Silver made everything better, until it didn't. That same evening, the town steward, one of the oldest men in the village, blind in one eye, lame in one foot, climbed the abbey stairs without a cane. He smiled. "It's a miracle," the monks beamed. But Milo watched his eye. It gleamed, not wetly, as eyes do, no gleamed like glass. A mirror where skin should have been. And as the man bowed before the altar, Milo caught a glimpse of his foot. The limp was gone, but the toes were dark, almost black, veined in silver beneath the skin. He turned away, bile rising in his throat. Later that night, he gathered everything he had left: dried herbs, salts, the rest of the green vitriol, and a dried-out rat skull he'd been using to measure weight ratios. He built a new experiment, an absorption ritual, something he found scratched on the back of the scroll in what looked like blood, or possibly red ochre. The idea was simple: trap the silver, bind it to a physical object, pull it out of the water. He chose a pebble from the well's base, dried it carefully, coated it with wax, and etched it with the scroll's mirrored glyph. He set it in the middle of a chalk circle and poured the mixture over it. The room filled with a sharp, peppery scent. The candlelight flickered violently, then steadied. The pebble cracked. Inside, not stone, not any more. It shimmered like silver, yes, but soft. Living, it pulsed faintly. He dropped it, heart pounding. It rolled once, then lay still, and the scroll unfurled. No coaxing, no heat. A full page he'd never seen opened like a yawn. In its center, a new diagram, what looked like a heart, connected to a network of wells with spirals stretching outward into the earth. The caption below read, "The seed has taken root. He read the accompanying script 5 times, each more dreadful than the last. It wasn't just the well anymore. The silver had spread to roots, to stone, to anything that drank. That meant the trees, the soil, possibly even the rain, and it wouldn't stop. Historically, many ancient cultures believed in silver veins beneath the earth, natural rivers of the stuff, connecting sacred places. It wasn't true, of course, but the idea persisted, especially in Germanic mining towns, where silver lodes were often discovered near churches, leading to the belief that God buried wealth beneath houses of worship. Historians still argue whether those associations were cause or coincidence, but fringe alchemists, they believed the earth itself grew silver like fruit, and if you cut too deep into it, it bled. Milo was beginning to think they were right, and now he had to lie. That morning, Brother Amos asked him why the herb garden was turning grey. The thyme, the mint, even the dandelions, they'd gone stiff, almost metallic to the touch. Frost, Milo offered. Strange weather for midsummer. The monk frowned but said nothing. Later, the baker's wife spilled her water jug and screamed. Her bare foot had landed in the puddle, and it sizzled. She hobbled to the abbey with a raw red mark across her sole. "Boiling," she cried. It burned like lye. The monks gathered. The steward frowned. "It's just water," he said, dipping a finger in the jug. His nail peeled off. No blood, no pain, just the nail, floating. "Still," he smiled. "A cleansing," he murmured. Milo turned away. That night, the scroll whispered, not with words, with sensation, a pulling at his ribs, a tightness in his chest that only eased when he placed his hand on the parchment. And then an image bloomed. A human skull, its eye sockets filled with silver coins, mouth agape. Roots grew from the base of the skull, curling into the soil. Where silver sleeps, silence grows. He threw the scroll across the loft. It landed softly and continued to glow. By morning, the town's chickens refused to drink. Dogs whined near the well but would not approach. Only the cats, slit-eyed and quiet, drank deeply and licked their lips. Brother Elric claimed the cats had always been smarter. Milo watched one cough up a mouse. The mouse was whole, but silver, down to its twitching tail. No one else saw it, or maybe no one wanted to. And through it all, the townsfolk kept drinking, even as lips cracked, even as joints stiffened, because they felt better, more powerful, more vital, even as their fingernails darkened and their veins gleamed faintly beneath the skin. They praised the well, they praised the water, and more than once, Milo heard someone call it the Silver Spring. He wanted to scream, but the scroll would not let him. Silver slivers floated in the fountain, not coins, not flakes from the abbey roof or some misplaced offering. Real, glimmering threads of silver, like shavings from a sculptor's blade, only impossibly thin, drifting lazily in the water as if they'd grown there. It was the children who noticed first. They squealed with delight, pointing and scooping at the strange new fairy dust. One girl ran through the abbey shouting, "The fountain's making treasure." The monks at first thought it was sunlight catching mineral sediment. "It's only the river reflecting through the aqueduct," said Brother Amos, waving off concern. "God's light plays tricks." But Milo knew better. It wasn't the light. It was the water. It had changed, and not just in the well. Now the public fountain, fed by the same underground spring, carried it too. The scroll remained disturbingly quiet. Milo tried everything, reciting chants, using salt, even pressing a warm coin to its surface. Nothing. Its ink stayed still, its paper dry, as if waiting for him to admit something he didn't yet understand. He wandered to the fountain late that night. No one else was around. The village square slept beneath stars that looked too close and too sharp. A fox darted through shadows and stopped at the edge of the fountain. It sniffed, lapped twice, then froze. Milo took a step closer, heart in his throat. The fox's tongue gleamed. It blinked, turned in a slow, stumbling circle and collapsed. No convulsions, no noise. Its body went still. He knelt beside it, afraid to touch it. The fur was stiff, the eye clouded. Its body remained intact, but Milo knew somehow the inside was already changing. He left it there. By morning it was gone. No one said a word about it. No one asked. But the silver remained. The villagers gathered like pilgrims. They brought buckets, pitchers, even carved ladles to scoop the silver shavings from the fountain basin. Some swore it healed bruises. Others claimed it made their coins shine brighter just by keeping it in their pockets. The baker began adding silver water to his pastries. A carpenter soaked his tools in it overnight, saying they no longer splintered. One woman rubbed it onto her baby's gums. He stopped crying, she said, beaming. Milo stared at the baby's mouth. The gums were faintly grey. The townspeople whispered to one another now with a feverish awe. "We are chosen," some said. "The abbey is blessed. This is divine." One even suggested erecting a shrine by the fountain. Brother Elric, who had always been the most skeptical, said, "Perhaps we have been blind to a miracle." That phrase echoed in Milo's skull all day. Blind to a miracle. But the baker's hands, remember those? They darkened further. He wore gloves now. "Saves on flour dust," he told anyone who asked. But Milo had seen the fingers beneath. Cracked, metallic, the skin stiff like cooling wax. One knuckle bled silver when sliced. And still the man smiled, as if it were worth it. A historical fact for you. In ancient Rome, silversmiths often suffered from what modern scholars call metal fume fever. Exposure to vapors during refinement led to symptoms like tremors, numbness, and sometimes delusions. Though they didn't understand the science, many believed silver carried a madness with it. That beauty came at the cost of something deeply human. Historians still argue whether early guilds warned apprentices or deliberately kept silent to preserve trade secrets. Reputation was everything. After all, Milo understood that now, no one wanted to see the truth when the lie felt this good, but fringe beliefs? Oh, those ran darker. Some alchemists claimed that silver wasn't born of the earth, but of suffering, that it grew wherever death had seeped into stone. That's why coins sparkled so brilliantly after wars, why rivers in plague-swept towns shimmered unnaturally. That's why treasure buried in cursed ground never stayed buried. By week's end, the water had grown thick, still clear, but heavy, like syrup. A boy dropped a pebble in and watched it sink slowly, lazily, as if reluctant to leave the surface. "The water's learning," he said, giggling. They all laughed. But Milo watched the boy's fingernails. They'd begun to lose their color, the pale pinks replaced with a cloudy shine. He checked the animals. Chickens refused to roost near the troughs. Now, cows wouldn't drink, only the cats, always the cats, lapped at the silver liquid with purring delight. One even began to glow faintly at night. No one commented on it. No one dared. The scroll uncurled again. It greeted him with a single new phrase. "The well births its children now." Below it a diagram, a fountain, surrounded by figures whose bodies merged into roots, their limbs stiff, their faces serene. Milo recoiled. He closed it too hard, snapping the scroll into a tight curl. For the first time, the parchment groaned. Not loudly, just enough to sound alive. He tried to speak to Brother Amos about the water. Not the scroll, he wasn't that foolish. But the symptoms. The skin, the animals, the shine. The monk frowned. "We live in times of blessing. If there is a cost, it is one God has chosen for us. And if God didn't choose," Milo whispered. Brother Amos gave him a long, quiet stare, then walked away. By now, coins from the fountain had made their way into market trade. Bakers paid the taxman with them. Children swapped them for ribbons and sugar bread. It didn't matter that they weren't stamped, that they shimmered wrong, that they stuck together sometimes, as if slightly wet. The townsfolk called them moon pennies. Milo called them what they were, spores. The silver was seeding the world now, and no one, not even the monks, wanted it to stop. It began with the baker's hands. The gloves were gone now, burned in the hearth, he claimed, when they started sticking to his skin. His fingers had stiffened, the joints no longer bending. They gleamed faintly, like old pewter left in sunlight. At first he smiled about it. "Stronger than ever," he said, lifting sacks of flour like they were feathers. "I don't even feel the weight." But he couldn't knead dough anymore, couldn't shape loaves, couldn't hold his daughter's hand without leaving streaks of grey. Still, He insisted he'd never felt better. That was the part that chilled Milo. They loved it. They wanted it. The sickness didn't feel like sickness. It felt like a gift. All through the village, it was spreading. Subtle at first stiffness, brightness, hair that refused to lie flat, pupils that caught light like animal eyes. But then came the symptoms no one could ignore. One woman opened her mouth mid-sermon and her tooth fell out. Not from rot, but from rejection. It had turned silver at the root. She picked it up with awe and pressed it to her lips. "They're changing me," she whispered, as if it were a blessing. Children began collecting the flakes from the fountain into little jars. Wishing dust, they called it. They painted it onto dolls, folded it into ribbons, smeared it on their eyelids. One child smeared it over her dog's paw. The dog refused to walk for 3 days and whimpered until it licked the paw clean. After that, it wouldn't come near the fountain again. Milo could no longer sleep in the loft. The hay itched, the goats avoided him. Even the straw had begun to harden, curled and darkened at the edges like singed parchment. He moved to a corner in the old cellar where he first found the scroll. It felt full circle somehow. The parchment now refused to stay curled. It stretched open every night, as if hungry for air. The symbols moved faintly when he blinked too long. One night it pulsed, faint and low, like a heartbeat beneath paper. When he touched it, he saw a new diagram. A man half-formed, his left side all sinew and skin, his right silvered, smoothed over like hammered metal. He stood beside a well, hand extended. In the water, his reflection smiled, though his real face did not. The caption, "What shines must bleed." It was the 3rd time that phrase had appeared. He didn't know what it meant. Not yet. Historically, silver has long been thought to purify. People soaked wounds with it, stored milk in silver jugs, and even dropped coins into water to prevent spoilage. But too much silver, especially ingested, leads to argyria, a rare condition where the skin turns blue-grey. Most historians agree it was seen as a mark of strange fortune, not illness. Some nobles with argyria were considered touched by the divine. Fringe alchemists took it further. They claimed argyria was the first stage of transmutation, not of metal, but of man. That the body, properly prepared, could become something beyond flesh, a vessel of eternal matter. "Flesh is fragile," wrote one German alchemist, "but silver endures." Historians still argue whether he meant it literally or poetically. Milo had no doubt anymore. The baker collapsed the following morning, right there in the square, surrounded by buyers. He fell forward with a grunt, hands hitting the stone in 2 sharp cracks. When they lifted him, both arms hung useless at his sides. Still, he smiled. "It's just the transformation," he muttered. "I can feel it." But beneath his tunic, grey had spread across his chest like lichen. They carried him home, praising his strength. And later, someone slipped a coin into his mouth for safe passage. The scroll pulsed again. Milo approached the well that evening. He hadn't in days. Not since the fox. Not since the baby's grey gums. But something drew him. He looked in. The surface reflected nothing. Not the moon. Not his face. Not even the rim of stone. Only shifting silver, smooth and undisturbed, like mercury coiled in a basin. He dipped a ladle and lifted it close. The liquid didn't drip. It clung. He poured it slowly into a glass vial. It moved like honey but evaporated like smoke, leaving a perfect silver line around the rim. He sealed it tight and hid it beneath the chapel's floorboards. Then the scroll unrolled again, revealing the largest section yet, an entire map of the village. Lines extending from the well, veins of silver curling through every structure, through the fountain, through the abbey, even beneath the woods beyond. At each endpoint a tiny dot. One began to glow. The bakery, then another. The chapel, then another. The inn. Each one flickered once, then stayed lit. The final caption read, "The seed drinks praise. The bloom is near." The bloom, he didn't know what that meant, but he knew what it felt like. Final. The villagers had begun calling him Silver Lad now. They brought him offerings, bread, coins, once even a carved figurine with painted silver eyes. He tried to refuse. They insisted. You brought the blessing, they said. You made the water new. He smiled weakly and took the gifts. But that night, he watched as the figurine's silver paint bled through the wood. It left a puddle that burned through the floor. He didn't touch it again, and the scroll whispered something new, not on parchment, but in his own voice. Inside his mind, you are the vessel now. They called him a saint. It began with a whisper, the silver lad, then the boy who touched the well, and now, a new name, Blessed Milo. He hadn't told them anything, not really, not about the scroll, not about the rituals, the mixtures, the rat, but the way they looked at him, you'd think he'd bled light and gold from his fingertips. They left offerings outside the stable door, now bowls of cream, carvings, silver coins that never tarnished. One woman even brought him a lock of her hair, wrapped in silk. So you'll know my family when you ascend, she said solemnly, placing it beside a sprig of mint. He didn't know how to respond. He just nodded, gently closed the door, and stared at the pile growing at his feet. The scroll never mentioned worship, but maybe it didn't need to. That afternoon, the village held a feast. The baker, still confined to a chair, was wheeled out beside the fountain. His arms didn't move anymore, and his lips twitched when he smiled, but his skin shone like armor under the sun. They placed a crown of ivy and silver on his head, first of the blessed, they called him. Then they looked to Milo. Someone brought forward a chalice, an old thing, dented, likely from the abbey's back cupboard. They dipped it into the fountain and raised it high. To the silver lad, cried the steward, who opened the spring. The crowd cheered. Milo tried to speak, to say it wasn't a miracle, wasn't anything holy. But when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. No words, just a sound like metal scraping glass. They cheered again. That night, the scroll opened by itself. No candle, no breath, just the sound of parchment unfolding, slow and patient. A new passage revealed itself, ink forming like steam on glass. Praise feeds the silver, the vessel fills, and beneath it, a drawing, Milo, unmistakably, not just a boy, but a figure wrapped in roots, one hand over the well, the other pressed to his chest. His eyes were silver, his mouth was sewn shut. He snapped the scroll shut, heart racing. He had to end this. He had to undo it. But how do you stop a thing that people want? Historically, the cult of personality wasn't rare in medieval villages. Saints were often proclaimed not by Rome but by local rumour. A monk who healed a boil with vinegar might become Saint Vinegar. A woman who survived a flood might be worshipped for generations. The church would sometimes step in, label its heresy, burn the name from records, but often they were too late. Historians still argue whether this was cultural desperation or genuine belief. Either way, the faithful rarely wanted facts. They wanted magic. Fringe records show that some self-declared saints were living, worshipped while still breathing. They'd be fed, adorned, given entire rooms of offerings, until their bodies failed under the pressure. One was reportedly encased in silver leaf, alive, and declared incorruptible. Milo didn't want to find out if that was true. The villagers were organizing a procession. They called it the Rite of Renewal. Silver coins tied to their cloaks, flowers dipped in well water, chants whispered through the square like half-remembered hymns. They insisted Milo lead it. He refused at first. Then they started crying. They knelt, begged, said their dreams were clearer when he smiled, that their bones hurt less when he walked past, that babies stopped crying when he touched their foreheads. What could he do? He agreed. The procession circled the well 3 times. Each pass, they tossed silver into the fountain. The water grew thicker, more viscous. It clung to the stone now like sap, trailing into gutters and rivulets. When someone slipped and cut their hand, the water hissed against their blood and sealed the wound. It heals, they murmured. They didn't see the skin harden afterward, didn't notice the woman's hand never bent again. That night, Milo crept into the apothecary and stole every reagent he could find. Lye, powdered brimstone, old bottles of black gall, anything that burned or cured or caused change. He returned to the loft, his old one, where the scroll first opened, and built a circle in the hay. He placed the scroll in the center, poured the reagents, whispered the chants backward. He waited. The scroll twitched, then caught fire. A clean, silent flame, blue-white and steady. It burned for nearly a minute, then went out. He stepped forward, heart pounding. The scroll remained, untouched, not even singed. He dropped to his knees. That was when the knock came. Not at the stable, at the well. He heard it. 3 soft, deliberate knocks, echoing through the night air like someone knocking from beneath the earth. He fled inside, didn't sleep, didn't move, just sat with the scroll in his lap, staring at the ink as it reshaped again. You cannot burn what has rooted. Outside, the fountain overflowed. Silver ran through the cracks in the stone like veins through pale skin. And in the morning, a child was born with eyes that reflected everything except the sun. The merchant arrived dressed in spice. At least, that's what Milo thought when the man stepped off the dusty cart, long robes trailing behind him, every fold perfumed with cloves and camphor. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, the kind city folk used to keep their faces in shadow, and walked with a slow, fluid grace, more glide than step. He didn't look like someone interested in sheep or wool or bread. He looked like someone watching. "My name is Cassian," the man said, bowing before the abbot with an oddly stiff smile. "I've come from Brazine. I've heard curious things about your village's water." The abbot chuckled, still drunk on the recent pageantry. "You're not the first. Our spring has gained some fame, even among the nobles. So I've heard." He stayed for tea. The monks poured him the silver water. He sniffed it, smiled, and let it touch his lips. "Sweet," he said, but he didn't drink. That night, Milo watched him from the bell tower. The merchant, or whatever he was, never retired to the guest house. Instead, he walked the village in silence, cloak brushing cobblestones, stopping often to place a small piece of parchment beside doors. Protection? A warning? By morning the parchments were gone, only ash remained, and Cassian was seated outside the fountain, watching the water glimmer. "Tell me," he said, as Milo passed, "what does it feel like to change a town?" Milo froze. "I didn't mean to, but you did," Cassian said. "You did something, boy. Something beautiful or terrible. Maybe both." He looked at Milo, really looked, and Milo felt the breath stutter in his chest. "You've touched the mirror." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small stone, polished smooth and inscribed with a single rune. "Take this," he said. "Hold it under your tongue if the silver calls your name too loudly." Then he stood, stretched, and strolled toward the apothecary, as if nothing more had happened than a passing hello. Later, Milo tried the stone. He tasted iron and salt and something like thunder. He spat it out and buried it in the stable yard. The scroll knew. It always knew. That night it opened to a new phrase: "The mouthless man watches the roots." Cassian, no doubt. But how did the scroll know him? Was it sentient, cursed, or simply responding to the changes in Milo's thoughts? Historians still argue how much medieval grimoires were believed to be alive. Some say the notion of living text was purely metaphorical, books that speak to the reader. Others argue, especially in fringe Benedictine circles, that certain scrolls were made with more than parchment, some supposedly inked with gall from unbaptized infants, or bound with sinew instead of thread. A grotesque exaggeration, almost certainly. Still, Milo began to wonder. Cassian lingered in the village for days, asking soft questions. "Has anyone tried boiling the silver water?" he asked Brother Amos. "What happens if you let it dry in the sun?" He asked a girl who had been painting with it, but his sharpest question came to Milo. "Do you dream in metal now?" Milo looked away, because yes, he did. His dreams had changed, no longer flickers of memory or nonsense. Now they were cold places, vaulted chambers of stone, filled with rivers of mercury. He walked alone, barefoot, and the floor chimed beneath each step. He saw faces in mirrors. Always his own, always smiling. He never smiled in his sleep. The scroll recorded the dreams. He didn't write them down, but every time he woke, a new sketch appeared, a corridor, a river, a well that spilled silver stars. The scroll was documenting him, but for what? The townsfolk were too deep now. Their hair dulled, their voices grew flat. Some no longer blinked. One woman whispered to a cat for hours. When Milo passed, she looked up and said, "They're teaching me the names of the elements." "What elements?" he asked. She pointed at the scroll in his hand. It wasn't visible. He hadn't taken it out. And still she knew. Cassian called a meeting in the square. No invitation, no fanfare. People simply gathered. "Your water is beautiful," he said. "But beauty corrupts, like sugar in teeth." The crowd murmured, uneasy. "It is changing you," he continued, "and not in ways you understand. Look at the baker. Look at the child who hasn't spoken since the baptism in the fountain. Whispers, glances. But the silver lad," Cassian said, turning to Milo, "has the power to end it." All eyes turned. "Tell them, Milo. Tell them what you did." Milo shook his head. "I didn't mean to, but you did." Silence fell. And then someone shouted, "You brought the blessing." Another, "He's the vessel. He feeds the spring." Cassian's face remained calm, unreadable. The villagers stepped forward, and Milo stepped back. They weren't angry. They were devoted, and that was worse. That night, Milo opened the scroll. It shimmered with heat. New words appeared in dripping lines. "The roots now taste belief. It sweetens the bloom." A fringe idea among apothecaries claimed belief had chemical weight, that a potion made with conviction could cure more than one brewed with doubt. Placebo, or power, no one knows. But now Milo understood. The silver wasn't feeding on metal, it was feeding on faith. The bread turned red, not blood red, not rotten, but a faint blush, like rust blooming just beneath the crust. When Milo pressed his thumb into it, a fine dust rose from the crumb, metallic, almost sweet-smelling, like cinnamon, if cinnamon could sharpen your teeth. "It's the flour," said the baker's daughter. Her hands, too stiff now to flex properly, were wrapped in strips of linen soaked in fountain water. "It's drinking the air, that's all." "The air?" Milo asked. She looked at him, eyes unfocused. "The silver's in everything now," she whispered. "Even the wind tastes cleaner." He backed away slowly. Around the village, crops began to warp. The wheat grew taller than it should, thick and golden, but when harvested it cracked like slate. The apples turned translucent and shimmered faintly under moonlight. Birds pecked them once, then flew away screaming. No one called it a curse, not yet. They called it abundance. Even as the milk curdled within hours, even as their skin grew cold to the touch, even in summer heat, the well's water now clung to fabric. Shirts washed in it grew stiff, sheets rustled like parchment. One child sneezed and coughed up a silver-flecked mucus that glittered briefly before fading. The village didn't slow. They sang in the square now, old hymns twisted with new verses about the mirror spring and the blessed bloom. Children carved tiny figurines of Milo out of soap and gave them to one another for luck. A merchant arrived from the next town and bought a pitcher of the fountain water for 5 silver pieces. By the next morning, his horse was dead. The merchant left without a word. Brother Amos began locking the apothecary at night. Milo heard him muttering prayers through the door. "My fingers are numb," the monk confessed one morning, trying to stir his tea and failing. Milo looked down. The spoon had bent. Not from heat, from resistance. The water didn't want to stir. The scroll offered no solution. Only another message. The vessel may deny praise, but praise will find the vessel. He burned the phrase into his memory. He couldn't write it down. He didn't want to see it again. That night, the abbey bell rang once. No one had pulled the rope. This time, even the monks grew uneasy. Cassian, the spice-scented stranger, sat beneath the bell tower and watched Milo approach. "You've done something irreversible," he said calmly. "It's not your fault, but it is your burden. How do I stop it?" Cassian leaned forward. "You don't, not anymore. The town chose to drink. There must be a way. There is always a way, but not always your way." He handed Milo a scrap of parchment, upon it a drawing, a chalice split in half, water flowing from both sides, one side into soil, the other into flame. Underneath, separate the root from the mirror. Milo stared. "What does it mean?" Cassian stood. "It means your next mistake will have to be bigger than your first." He left the parchment on the bench and walked away. The next morning the chapel's crucifix tarnished, not from soot or age, but from within. The wood darkened, the nails gleamed. The priest said nothing, but his voice broke when he tried to read aloud. Milo returned to the fountain. It no longer reflected the sky, just silver, thick and sluggish. It bubbled faintly, not from any spring. There was no sound of inflow now, but from within itself, self-circulating, breathing maybe, and something glinted at the bottom. He peered closer. A coin? No, a face. His own, not a reflection, not a trick. A face made of silver, eyes closed, lips parted in a soundless chant. It looked peaceful. That night, he poured salt water into the well, a gallon of it, then vinegar, then holy water stolen from the chapel font. Nothing. The surface hissed once, then stilled. Later, the scroll uncurled again. The new passage: salt binds the body, vinegar scars the flesh, but belief seeps deepest. Even fire wouldn't touch it now. He tried burning a dried stalk of fountain-grown wheat. The flame refused to catch. It glowed faintly, then crumbled into silver dust. A dog bit into a bread crust and whimpered as its tongue hardened. The baker's arms had fused to the elbows. He sat in his chair in the square now like a statue, lips moving silently. They still offered him food, still called him first of the blessed. A historical note to disturb your dreams during a small, unexplained affliction in 1352 near Toulouse. Villagers developed stiff joints and discolored skin after drinking from a new well. Some claimed it brought them closer to God. Others accused the well of boiling the soul. The symptoms vanished after the well was sealed. Whether it was metal poisoning or mass hysteria remains debated, but one monk wrote, "Those who drank were quieter after, as if some part of them had been cooled forever." Milo recognized that now. People were quieter. They laughed less. They blinked less. But they still smiled, and that terrified him most. He climbed the bell tower that night with a bottle of oil and a torch. He would burn the scroll, the abbey, the well if he had to, but the scroll was already there, laid neatly on the tower's bench, unfurled to a new diagram. A figure, arms outstretched, fire at their feet, silver pouring from their eyes. The caption: "What roots in faith must be undone in flame, but only when the vessel bleeds." He let the torch fall. It missed the oil. The wind caught it, carried it far. The scroll laughed, not aloud, just in the way it curled inward, gently, knowingly. And below, the fountain began to overflow, again, not in rushes, in ribbons. Silver streams coiling down the street, toward the bakery, toward the chapel, toward the fields. And people gathered, cups in hand, eyes glowing, praising, always praising. The scroll began to whisper, not in words, at first, in sensations, gooseflesh at the wrong moments, a buzzing in Milo's teeth whenever someone spoke his name, a flicker in his vision when he passed by mirrors, reflections delayed by a fraction too long. The scroll pulsed gently in the corner of his vision, even when it was closed, tucked beneath his tunic, like a second heartbeat, like a thought that didn't belong to him, but had begun to occupy his mind. One night, unable to sleep, he unrolled it in the cellar, his hands shaking, lines of ink, unfurled like vines, twisting across the page faster than he could read. The vessel is open. The chant may be spoken. What roots in silence may now be summoned in sound. He pressed his palm against the parchment. Heat spread through his skin. The symbols rippled beneath his fingers, and then his voice. Speaking words he did not know. He did not mean to say them. They poured out of his mouth like water from a burst dam. Syllables sharp as broken glass, vowels too long for a human tongue. He chanted for nearly 2 minutes, until the scroll snapped shut with a suddenness that knocked him backward into the dirt. He gasped. His ears rang, but he was not alone. There was something in the cellar with him. No footsteps, no breathing, just a presence. The unmistakable weight of being watched by something ancient. The rats didn't scurry anymore. They stayed still, eyes glassy. A few had turned silver completely, little statues frozen mid-step. He fled to the abbey's chapel, only to find Brother Elric collapsed at the altar, his hand splayed across a psalter page. His skin had taken on a dull shine, like wax. His lips barely moved. Milo knelt beside him. Elric's eyes opened, unfocused. he whispered. They're singing beneath the floorboards. Milo felt it too then. A hum, low and steady. It vibrated through the stone like a distant chant, wordless and endless. He rushed outside. The village was glowing, not brightly, not like torches or firelight, but from within. A dull silver luminescence had settled into the stone of the square, the walls of the bakery, even the wooden beams of the well. People moved slower now, their speech softened, their laughter echoed strangely, and no one questioned it. Except Milo. He ran to the fountain, splashed his face, slapped his cheeks, shouted into the night, but no one turned. They only watched, serene, their expressions glassy and fixed. When he returned to the cellar, the scroll had unfurled itself again. New words, whispers birth roots, roots birth silence, silence becomes silver. And in the corner, a single word repeated 3 times. Chant, chant, chant. He didn't understand until the dreams started. Each night, he found himself standing in the abbey, surrounded by villagers with glowing mouths, all chanting the same phrase. Not words, not really, but a series of syllables that vibrated his bones. When he awoke, he could still taste the sound on his tongue. He tried not to speak them. He tried very hard, but one day he passed a boy tossing silver flakes in the well, and the chant slipped from his lips like a reflex. The boy stopped, turned, his eyes gleamed, and he smiled too wide. "I heard you," he whispered. "Now I remember it." By dusk, 4 others were chanting. By dawn, the whole bakery sang while shaping loaves. The sound wrapped the village like a fog. Everyone humming it, everyone smiling, except Cassian. The spice-cloaked stranger stood at the fountain with eyes like granite. "You've opened the mouth," he said. "I didn't mean to." "But you spoke," Cassian replied. "You invited. What's coming?" Cassian looked at the scroll in Milo's hands. "You already know." A historical aside, in 12th first century Bohemia, there were reports of mass chanting afflictions, villagers caught in looping prayers day and night. Some say it was religious hysteria, others claim the chants weren't in any known tongue. Priests would arrive to break the spell, only to begin chanting themselves. Historians still argue whether this was psychosis or plague. Fringe thinkers, however, whisper that certain patterns of sound, certain frequencies, can change the body, that a voice, spoken in the wrong way, can wake things. The scroll now bore diagrams that pulsed, like veins, like they were listening. Milo tried to draw them from memory, but his hands wouldn't cooperate. The quill trembled. The ink boiled. He gave up. Instead, he returned to the stable and lifted a loose board where he'd hidden the vial of well water from weeks ago. It was no longer liquid. It had solidified into something like a pearl, but when he touched it, it was warm. He heard a note hum from it, one single pitch, like a tuning fork inside his skull. And then words, not his own, but in his voice. "The bloom nears." He dropped the vial. It cracked. Inside, the pearl twitched. He buried it again, but the chant remained on his lips, like a fever. That night, the scroll revealed a face, not a sketch, not a drawing, a real face, pressed into the parchment from the other side, as if it were looking through a thin veil. Its mouth moved, no sound, but Milo knew what it was saying. Chant, chant, and chant. Old Mora was the first to remember. She was older than the hills, they said, with a back like a crooked staff and breath that smelled of cloves and onion stew, the sort of elder everyone pretended to avoid, but always consulted in secret. A widow of 3 husbands, all taken by cold, as she liked to say with a wink. And now, she sat outside her cottage with a shawl over her knees and something else behind her eyes. "I've seen this before," she said. Milo stopped mid-step. She was staring at the fountain, not drinking, not chanting, just watching. It was smaller then, just a pool, no fountain, no well, but the silver was there. He approached slowly, when, before the war, before the fire, before even that abbey wall was new, she nodded toward the moss-covered stones along the old chapel. "I was a girl, 11, maybe 12. Milo crouched beside her. "He came from the rocks," she continued. voice brittle. After the quake, the water tasted sweet. The priest said it was holy. People danced, got better, grew taller, grew strange. She showed him her hand. The skin was spotted, creased, but her nails shimmered faintly beneath the yellow. My sister drank more than I did, Mora whispered. Too much. Her hair turned white at 13. She stopped speaking, stared at the walls, like she was reading letters no one else could see. What happened? Mora looked at him. She walked into the spring and didn't come out. Milo felt the cellar air again, the silence of the scroll, the twitching pearl. What did they do? Nothing. Her smile was tight, buried the spring under stones, planted ivy, prayed louder. He swallowed. Why didn't Situ say anything until now? No one believed me last time. She spat. Why would they now? A gust of wind passed through the square. Children's laughter drifted faintly from the fountain, where they tossed clumps of silver dust into the air like confetti. It comes in cycles, she muttered. Not a curse, not a blessing, a process. And you, she pointed one crooked finger at his chest, you cracked it open. Milo looked down at his tunic, as if the scroll were burning a mark beneath it. That night, the scroll was already unrolled when he returned to the cellar. The ink was different. Red, this time. Not blood, but close. A new message. The bloom remembers its last gardener. And below, a sketch, two girls standing at the edge of a spring, one taller, with silver-streaked hair. The other, face turned to the ground, vines growing from her eyes. A crown of ivy hung in the air above them. He knew it was Mora and her sister. He closed the scroll quickly. The air in the cellar smelled like frost now, like winter had begun to gather inside the walls. He visited Mora the next morning. Her door was open. The house was empty. No signs of a struggle, no shattered bowls. Just her shawl on the chair and a silver root coiled in the center of the floorboards. It pulsed gently. He ran, through the village, past the chapel, into the woods, hoping idiotically to outpace whatever he'd started. But the chant was everywhere now, hummed in birdsong, breathed by the wind, echoed in the drip of water from mossy branches. There was nowhere outside of it anymore. Historically, few European villages documented multi-generational silver afflictions, but some do exist. A small Swiss hamlet near the Grimsel Pass reported in 1319 that a blessing spring reappeared every 88 years. The pattern, an initial golden age of health and prosperity, followed by discoloration, silence, and eventual abandonment. No coins were ever found on the site, only bones. Fringe accounts insist certain locations bloom periodically, brief pockets where transmutation can occur, not just to matter, but to memory. Places where the land itself remembers what it once was, and what it desires to become again. Milo returned to the square. The fountain overflowed now, not in sloshes or rivulets, but in measured pulses, like breath, like a heartbeat. No one questioned it. The baker's chair sat empty. A child had replaced him, stiff-limbed and smiling, eyes glassy. The chant was no longer whispered. It was woven into speech. Greetings, prayers, even laughter carried the rhythm now. A syncopated, metallic cadence that scraped at Milo's bones. And still, they looked to him. Blessed Milo. Silver lad, the boy who brought the water. He tried to speak, tried to scream, but his voice had changed. His words clinked against the air like coins tossed in a bowl. And then Cassian appeared again, standing beneath the bell tower, shadowed and silent. She told you the truth, he said softly. Mora, she's gone, she's joined. What is this? Milo's voice broke. Cassian didn't smile. This is not alchemy, not sorcery. This is reaction. Like fire to oil, the scroll was a match. You were the hand, then why me? Cassian finally looked at him fully, and Milo saw the truth. The stranger's pupils were gone. His eyes were mirrors, because you listened. The scroll opened again that night, without being touched. It had redrawn the village map. But now the edges pulsed like roots searching for new soil, and one phrase stood above the fountain, written in seething black ink. All who forget return to bloom. Milo wept, and the scroll stayed warm in his hands. He didn't want to know what came next, but the scroll didn't care. It opened itself again before dawn, unfurling slowly across the cellar floor like a tongue tasting the air. The ink shimmered in silver spirals, then bled outward into dark crimson vines that wrapped around a single bold phrase at the center. Stabilize the silver, anchor the bloom. The price is flesh. Milo stared. There it was, the final step. The one he had sensed from the beginning but never truly believed. Alchemy, they said, always came with a cost. But this wasn't metaphorical. It wasn't spiritual. It was painfully literal. It wanted a sacrifice. Not symbolic, not ceremonial. Actual. There were diagrams. A heart. A dagger. A body lowered into a basin. All connected by silver threads. No mistaken interpretation this time. He read the instructions 3 times, each more breathless than the last. No ambiguities, no hidden riddle. The scroll wanted blood, and not just anyone's. It specified the vessel. Him. He backed away. His heel caught on a loose stone. He nearly fell. No, he whispered. No, no, no. But his voice echoed too smoothly off the stone. Almost harmonized with itself. The chant was in him now. Humming gently under his skin, like a second pulse. He slammed the scroll shut and locked it in a box beneath the abbey's kitchen. But that night, it reappeared in his bedroll, waiting. The villagers gathered in the square the next morning. They carried garlands woven from wheat turned grey at the tips, silver-painted flowers, and bread that crackled faintly when broken. It was the day of the silver offering. They made it up, just decided it was a holiday, and no one questioned it. Not even the monks. They presented gifts to the fountain, mirrors, glass beads, bolts of cloth, books, and placed them one by one into the rippling silver pool. The water absorbed everything. No splash, no ripple, just a gentle draw, like breath into lungs. A boy dropped his rag doll into it. His sister tried to fish it out. The water pulled her hand downward, fast, too fast. She screamed. The baker's daughter, now half-silvered, and speaking in quiet riddles, stepped forward and placed her palm on the girl's shoulder. "It takes only what it needs," she said. The water released the child, but the doll didn't come back. Milo met Cassian again, under the old elm behind the apothecary. The leaves had begun to grey. "I found the final step," he said quietly. Cassian didn't set nod, didn't set blink. "The scroll wants me," Cassian replied. "Will it stop?" "No," he said. "But it might pause long enough." "For what?" "For people to forget again." Milo's fists clenched. "Forget? Like Mora?" Cassian's face remained expressionless. "That's how the silver sleeps. It feeds on attention, worship, memory. Break those and it quiets." "I don't want to die," Milo said. "I didn't say you have to." Milo looked up. Cassian pulled a vial from his robe. Inside a shimmering liquid, darker than the fountain water, almost black, but when tilted, it reflected too many colors at once, like it didn't belong to this world. "This is called royal mercury," Cassian said. "It predates the scroll." "What does it do?" Cassian held it up to the light. "It poisons the root." A pause, or awakens the fruit. "Which is it?" Milo whispered. Cassian gave the faintest, saddest shrug. Historians still argue. He didn't take it. Not yet. Instead he returned to the chapel. The crucifix had fallen, not rotted, not broken, fallen, and beneath it, a puddle of silver. One monk had gone missing. The others were still listening, as Brother Amos put it. Sitting in the pews with blank faces, eyes closed, mouths open just slightly, as if humming a sound too soft for ears. Even the stained glass had begun to fog. The holy water font was now silver. The chapel bell rang once at dusk. Again no one touched the rope. Milo stood outside and watched as more villagers dropped to their knees, not in worship, in submission. They weren't praying, they were offering their silence, their names, their bodies. That night, the scroll pulsed. The final diagram revealed itself, a body stretched across a basin shaped like the well, a line connecting heart to root, another connecting eye to moon, and below when the vessel breaks, the bloom completes. He couldn't stop shaking. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. He held the royal mercury under candlelight and tried to will it into meaning something else. A cure, a lie, a test. But it was only ever one thing, a choice. A medieval belief held that mercury quicksilver was the first metal born of chaos and moonlight. Alchemists said it was both male and female, both god and worm. It could cure or kill depending on the purity and the will of the one who used it. Fringe thinkers claimed royal mercury wasn't of this world, that it came from fallen stars, that it knew the soul of the one who touched it. They called it the metal that remembered. Milo took it, not all of it, just a drop, placed it on his tongue. It didn't burn, it whispered, not in words. In images, a mirror cracking, a seed splitting open, a bloom of silver petals rising from black soil, and at its center him, eyes closed, arms outstretched, not dead, transformed. He swallowed and waited. The scroll pulsed once, then went still, and in the well, the silver stopped moving. Just for a moment. A long, deep, breathless moment. Then it shimmered again, soft, calm, as if it had been appeased, but the price hadn't been paid. Not yet. The firelight flickered like it knew a secret. The villagers gathered in a wide circle near the square, each holding a silver-dusted torch. The chant had become almost automatic by now, a low, humming undercurrent in every breath they took. Even the children, too young to understand words, swayed to it like waves following the moon, and at the center of it all stood Milo, rope around his wrists. He hadn't resisted, not because he agreed, but because no one forced him. They asked, politely, reverently, as if offering him a crown. "It's a blessing," they said. "You brought the gift. You will bloom fully," whispered the baker's daughter, her tongue visibly silver now. He tried to speak, to plead, to explain, but his voice had vanished, replaced with that same chant that spilled from his lips involuntarily whenever he opened his mouth. So he stood in silence, surrounded by flickering torches and faces that glowed with eerie, moonlit devotion, and at the edge of the square, Cassian watched, unbound, unaffected, uninvited. The monks emerged next. All but one. Brother Amos led them with a quiet solemnity. Their robes, once brown, now tinged with metallic threads, their eyes vacant, reflecting flame and starlight. At the base of the fountain, a slab had been prepared, smooth, polished stone veined with silver, the altar. They called it the vessel's table. They did not drag him, they simply laid him down with gentle hands, whispering the chant all the while. Then they brought the knife. No iron, no steel, silver. He recognized it. One of the abbey's old relics. A letter opener once used to slice parchment, now honed to a gleaming edge, shaped like a leaf, light as air. It was passed hand to hand until it reached Brother Amos. He looked down at Milo. "I'm sorry," the monk said, and in his eyes there was still something human, something afraid. "Is there another way?" Milo mouthed. Amos didn't answer, just raised the blade. That's when the bell rang. Not one chime, 13, each one louder than the last. The villagers stopped, the chant faltered, the blade hovered, and above them, silhouetted in the tower's light, Mora, old Mora. She shouldn't have been alive, she shouldn't have been moving, and yet there she was, hunched, hollow-eyed, hair white as ash, arms outstretched. "It isn't done yet," she shrieked. "The silver hasn't chosen." Cassian moved then, so fast it was like wind had taken form. He stepped between the torchbearers, scattering silver flames, and shouted in a voice sharper than the blade, "Stop!" The villagers blinked, confused. The chant wavered. Cassian pointed toward the fountain. It was boiling, no flames, no heat, just rising, roiling, silver, bubbling like a pot left too long on a fire, churning with purpose. Then a limb, not human, not beast, just something silver and vaguely shaped like a root, stretching skyward from the fountain's center. The crowd gasped. Cassian turned to Milo. "It's blooming early. What do I do?" Milo whispered. "Decide. You said the sacrifice would stop it." Cassian's mouth tightened. "Slow it, not stop. You were the spark. The only one who can pull it back is you." And if I don't? Cassian nodded toward the well, where a second root broke the surface, then a third, then a silver face, featureless and wet, rising like a coin from deep mud. It opened its mouth and began to chant, louder than the villagers, louder than the bell. It was the source. The crowd dropped to their knees as if hypnotized. Milo tried to sit up. Cassian pulled him to his feet. "You can bleed," Cassian said, "or you can fight." Milo looked down at the scroll, unfurled once more on the altar slab, ink alive, symbols dancing like firelight. A single new line had appeared. If the vessel defies the mirror, the root recoils. Milo grabbed the royal mercury vial from Cassian's sleeve. Cassian didn't even flinch and turned to the fountain. The face was still rising. It was no longer human-shaped. Its edges melted and reformed. One moment it looked like Mora. Then Milo himself. It mimicked belief. It fed on it. He uncorked the vial. A deep chill spread over his hand. Instantly, he walked toward the well. The villagers parted in silence. He raised the vial and drank. What happened next can only be described as a split. Inside Milo, a sound began, not heard, but felt, like someone plucking the strings of his soul. The silver water in the well convulsed, then pulled downward like it had been yanked from the base. The scroll curled violently. The roots began to retract. The face screamed, soundless but deafening, a shriek that cracked stone and made birds fall from the sky. Then implosion, not explosion. Implosion, like the village itself had been sucked inward for one long breath. Then stillness. Milo collapsed. Cassian caught him, barely. The scroll was gone. So was the silver face. The well still glowed faintly, but the water no longer shimmered, just water, cold, clear, unremarkable. The villagers blinked awake, confused, afraid. Many wept. Brother Amos collapsed beside the altar, the silver blade falling from his hand. Milo coughed once, and silver smoke poured from his mouth. A historical debate persists around the concept of counter-alchemy, rituals intended to unmake transformations. Most dismissed them as paranoia, but a handful of scrolls, scattered across old Iberian and Italian monasteries, hint at procedures involving mercury, bodily resonance, and symbolic refusal. Fringe scholars claim one can refuse being transmuted, but only if they name what they were before. Milo whispered his name. Not Silver Lad. Not Blessed Vessel. Just Milo. The scroll, somewhere beneath the chapel, dissolved into dust, and the fountain went still. The river shimmered like a ribbon of molten coin. It had rained the night before, hard, the kind of rain that made earth bleed and wells overflow. Milo woke in the cellar to the sound of dripping, steady, hollow, rhythmic. The well was breathing again. He ran, but the fountain was dry, its basin cracked. The silver threads once etched across the stones had flaked away like peeling paint. The scroll was gone, yes, but the silence it left behind was somehow louder. And then came the messenger from the next village. A girl soaked to the bone, eyes wide. She stumbled into the abbey kitchen with nothing but a broken sandal and a tale that turned every face pale. "There's something in the river," she said, "downstream." They followed her to the old ridge trail, past the grain fields and across the mossy stones that marked the edge of their valley, and there it was. The river below, once narrow, slow and muddy, was no longer brown. It was silver. Not every inch, not a perfect mirror, but long streaks ran through it, like veins of quicksilver braided in water. Fish floated belly up. A goat bleated pitifully near the bank, refusing to drink. And on a mossy rock, just above the eddy, a child's wooden cup from his village. Milo's stomach dropped. He looked around at the others. No one spoke, but Cassian was there. Of course he was. He stood at the cliff's edge, arms folded, eyes on the glinting current. "I didn't pour it in," Milo said, voice low. Cassian didn't turn. "No, but you cracked the shell. The scroll's gone. The root isn't." A wind passed through the trees. Cold, wet, metallic. "It spread?" Milo asked. "It wants to spread," Cassian replied. "It always has. You didn't invent the bloom. You just fed it. let it remember how to wake. But I undid it. In the village, Cassian turned, and his eyes were darker than ever, still reflective, still mirror-like. You slowed it, you refused it, but you didn't kill it. The others behind them began to murmur. One of the monks cupped water from the stream in his hand, examined it, then let it fall. It's thinner, he said. Not like the well water. Cassian nodded. Diluted, but no less alive. Milo took a step toward the bank. The river didn't hiss, didn't glow. It just moved, steady, purposeful, carrying its silver threads eastward toward other towns, other wells, other vessels. That night, Milo dreamed again, but it was no longer the vaulted silver corridors or faceless chanting crowds. Now he stood at a river delta. The sea stretched out before him, calm and vast, and floating in the water, silver lilies, hundreds, maybe thousands. They opened and closed with the tide, as if breathing. From beneath one of them, a pale hand emerged, not reaching, just there, like it had grown that way. He awoke with a scream lodged in his throat. He tried to warn them. He begged the monks to write letters to neighboring villages. He urged the steward to send riders upstream and downstream to test the waters, but the villagers were slow to move. They were tired, they said. Their bones ached in ways they couldn't describe. Their dreams had become too peaceful to question. They were better now, even if their skin no longer felt warmth. And so they stayed. The silver had receded from the square, but it hadn't left their veins. They carried it quietly, like an ember behind the eyes. Milo watched as they took longer to blink, spoke more softly, laughed less often. They were forgetting, not just the bloom, themselves. And that, perhaps, was the bloom's final gift. Forgetfulness. A historical curiosity during the alchemical scandals of the late 1400s, several German towns reported sudden collective amnesia following mass experimentation with tinctures of mercury and silver nitrate. Town records showed entire months erased from memory. Some scholars blamed toxic exposure, others suggested religious repression. Fringe documents claimed something was erased, intentionally, not just from records, but from minds. A process, a transformation, one they no longer remembered beginning. Milo could not forget. He followed the river, not far, just a day's walk downstream, enough to confirm what he feared. The water had reached the next town. They called it a new shine, said their water wheel turned faster, that their fish caught the sun in strange ways. One man offered him a drink from a jug that smelled sweet. Milo ran, back to the village, back to the scroll's ashes, only there were none. He'd buried the remains beneath the chapel's altar, but when he returned, the floor was undisturbed. No signs of ash, no signs of fire, just the faint outline of something once burned and now missing. He turned to Cassian. You took it. Cassian tilted his head. I kept it from reaching the wrong hands. Whose hands are the right ones? Cassian's silence was answer enough. Milo returned to the river. He carried the vial of royal mercury. Still half full, he poured it slowly into the current, letting it mix, vanish. He hoped it would poison the silver, slow it, silence it, but the river rippled, once, twice, then settled, and at his feet, caught between two stones, a lily bloomed, silver, perfect. The abbey burned on a windless night. No storm, no lightning, no flickering torch dropped in haste. The sky was clear, the stars were bright, and yet when Milo awoke, smoke already curled past the rafters of the stable, and the bells tolled, not in warning but in mourning. The flames roared in complete silence. That was the first sign something wasn't natural. Not a single crack or snap of timber, just the glow, orange and white, licking every stone of St. Brannock's Abbey like it was being erased. The monks didn't scream. They stood outside in rows, barefoot in the frost, watching with blank faces as their home dissolved. No buckets were lifted, no prayers shouted, only the hum, that low, steady chant. So quiet it was almost a vibration. Milo ran toward them, voice hoarse. We can save it! Help me! No one moved. Then Brother Amos turned. His mouth moved, but the words were not his. We are finished. Behind him, the roof collapsed. Milo backed away. the heat singeing his cheeks. And then he saw it, a scroll, untouched by flame, lying on the threshold of the chapel entrance, curled tight but glowing from within. He froze. It wasn't his scroll. The symbols on its leather cover were unfamiliar, cruder, angular, like scratching on bone. But the feel, it was the same, alive, waiting. Cassian stood by the well. "I didn't do this," Milo said. Cassian didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt at the edge of the scorched garden and sifted through the grey ash. He lifted something, a coin, silver, untarnished. "They burned the abbey to bury it," Cassian said. "The monks?" "No. The silver." Milo stepped forward, breath short. "You mean it did this?" Cassian finally looked at him. "No," he said. "You did." The flames burned clean, too clean. By sunrise the abbey was gone, not ruined, gone. Nothing but black soil and smooth stone, as if no walls had ever stood. Only the well remained, untouched. Silver trickled faintly from its rim, as if weeping. The fountain, too, had gone dry. The villagers gathered in quiet clusters. No one spoke. A few tried to hum, but the chant had left them. Their voices cracked, their throats rasped. As if the bloom had moved on, Milo retrieved the new scroll. He didn't want to touch it. He really didn't. But his fingers moved anyway. The leather cover was warm. Inside, the same strange diagrams, only these ones were growing. The ink spread as he watched, curling and weaving, sketching fresh glyphs into the margins. One phrase appeared: "When the vessel refuses, the flame is devoured." He threw it down. It landed with a soft thud and did not close. The silver roots were not just in the water anymore. They were in script, in language, in memory. A historical note to chill your spine in 14th century Denmark. A series of church fires were reported to leave behind one artifact untouched. An alchemical parchment referred to as the Flame Tongue. It allegedly reappeared in at least 3 monasteries over 50 years. No origin, no author, just new diagrams each time, always with a single line of silver-threaded script. "This is not fire. This is hunger." Fringe historians argue the scroll was never physical, that it was a pattern, a mimic, recreating itself in the minds of those who sought forbidden transmutations. Back in the village, no one mourned the abbey. Not truly. They accepted the fire as they had accepted the silver, with silence, with bowed heads, with a strange, terrible peace. Cassian visited Milo that evening. He brought tea. They sat on the edge of the field, where the wheat had once grown golden, but now cracked like frostbitten glass beneath their boots. "She's quiet now," Cassian said, sipping. "She?" Milo asked. Cassian nodded toward the well. "The silver." "Is Seps alive?" Cassian hesitated. "Not alive like you and me. Alive like hunger, like fire. It doesn't sect think. It reacts. You fed it praise, ritual, self, and now..." Cassian tilted his head. "She's remembering you." Or Milo shivered. "I thought it was over," he whispered. Cassian looked at him. Truly looked. "It won't be over until you're forgotten." Milo dropped his gaze. Then quietly, "Then I have to leave." Cassian said nothing. But he handed Milo a cloak, heavy, dust-colored, lined with herbs that smelled faintly of wormwood and fennel. "To mask you," Cassian said. "For how long?" "Long enough." He left that night. No procession, no farewell, just one boy stepping away from the ashes, his shadow long and bent under the moon's weight. He didn't look back, because the well was still there, still silver, still waiting. They started calling it the Gilded Plague. Not in Milo's village. There they had already lost the words. But further downstream, where the river twisted through trading posts and mill towns, people noticed. First the fish stopped biting, then the cattle refused to drink, then the sickness came. It didn't look like disease. Not at first. There were no fevers, no rashes, just stillness. People began to speak more slowly, blink less. Their skin paled to an uncanny polished hue, and in their blood, traces of silver. Doctors pricked their arms and watched the fluid gleam under candlelight. No one knew where it began. No one pointed to the village, but the river knew. Milo kept moving, deeper into the hills. He avoided the main roads, slept in barns and under trees, and spoke to no one, not because he feared being caught, because he feared being seen. He'd catch glimpses of himself in ponds and glass shop windows and notice it, the faint shine, the metallic edge to his silhouette. His eyes reflected too sharply, even in the dark. He wrapped his face in a scarf. He walked only by night, but still the whispers spread. There was talk of a boy, young, alone, marked by silver. The mirror walker, they called him, the pale one, the alchemist's heir. In one town, a group of children played a game. They'd take a coin, drop it in a jug of water, and chant 3 times, "Blessed boy, come out and shine." Then they'd drink the water. Within a week, one of the boys stopped speaking altogether. His tongue turned grey, his dreams became vivid, too vivid. The town doctor took a sample of his blood. Inside the vial, threads of silver. The gilded plague had arrived. By royal decree, silver coinage was banned. Too many strange illnesses. Too many whispers. Alchemists were rounded up, their books confiscated, their labs burned. The king's own physician claimed the moon had infected the earth, that the metal had become too awake. Church bells rang in warning rather than worship. Merchants fled riverside towns. Wells were sealed. Whole villages, once thriving, became hushed places with blank-eyed residents and silent fountains. And everywhere, that same phrase scratched into wood and stone and doors: "Do not speak the silver's name." A historical curiosity, in 15th century France, a phenomenon known as argent somnus, the silver sleep, was blamed for the sudden collapse of 3 villages. Residents were found alive but unresponsive, sitting in homes with hands clasped as if in prayer. Blood samples collected by Benedictine scribes reportedly contained a bright mirror fluid. The documents were lost in a fire, or perhaps burned deliberately. Historians still argue if the silver sleep was an allegory for ergot poisoning, spiritual mass withdrawal, or something stranger. Fringe scholars believe the condition wasn't natural, but invited. Milo avoided those towns. He felt them before he reached their outskirts. Air too clean, too still, too listening. The scroll was gone, but the chant remained. Sometimes, when he stepped near water, he heard it in the wind. Chant, bloom, forget. He reached the borderlands in early spring. The forests there were deep, unmapped, haunted by superstition and long-dead lords. He found an abandoned tower by a dry creek and made it home. No villagers, no well, no eyes, just trees and silence. He buried the vial of royal mercury beneath the hearthstone. He boiled his water. He whispered no names. And for a time, months maybe, he was alone, untouched, human. But then came the merchant, not Cassian, younger. Nervous, reeking of river salt and false humility, he arrived with a limp and a bundle of silver thread. "Word is," he said, "there's a boy out here who knows how to sing to metal." Milo said nothing. The merchant leaned in. "My lord's daughter is ill, pale. She sees lights in her dreams, speaks in rhymes. Her hands," he showed his own fingers, "shaking, they shimmer now." Milo looked away. "I can pay," the merchant pleaded. "Not in silver, in grain, salt, books, whatever you need." "Puh," Milo simply asked. "Did she drink from the river?" The merchant nodded. "Then it's begun," Milo whispered. He sent the man away, but that night, when he opened his door, he found a single silver coin on his threshold. It was wet, still glistening, still alive. He tossed it into the fire. It hissed and laughed. He tried writing the scroll from memory, not to revive it, but to trap it, to extract its patterns, its geometry, its cursed rhythms. But every time he wrote, the ink bled, not just on the page, on his hands, his skin, his mouth. The symbols reappeared in his dreams, whispering from between the trees. He stopped trying, burned the pages, but he remembered them, all of them, and that, he knew, was enough. Too much. He heard whispers again from passing riders. A town to the east, Varnum, had outlawed mirrors. They move when no one's watching, they said. Another village reportedly lost their priest after he attempted to boil silver coins into holy water. The steam melted his eyes. And one letter, unsigned but marked with a spiral symbol, simply read, "It's blooming again. The plague didn't gallop in like war or fire. It trickled, it dripped, one voice at a time, one chant in sleep, one shimmer in the blood, and through it all, Milo wandered in silence. Not because he had no voice, but because he feared what would happen if he used it. He wore a mask now. Not for sickness, not for disguise, but for protection from memory. It was a simple thing, carved wood, polished with ash and oil, the eyes narrowed and mouth sealed shut. No silver, no adornment, nothing that could shine. It fit tight across his face, tied with a strip of leather soaked in salt. He'd made it himself. And when he walked into towns, cloaked and anonymous, people took him for a wandering healer or a mute scribe. Fine, let them guess. He never gave his name, never lingered, never drank the water. At inns he listened quietly. Word of the gilded plague had spread further than he feared. Reports of children who no longer aged, of wells whose water tasted like sunlight, but made livestock miscarry. One town claimed their harvest had doubled, but the wheat turned black in winter, and when baked, sang softly in the ovens. They still ate it. One merchant, half drunk, bragged he knew where the Silver River started. A place that shines like dawn, he slurred. With a boy whose eyes are mirrors, Milo slipped away before the man could notice him. But the rumor followed him town to town. In one village he passed a chapel built entirely from silver-flecked stone. A woman knelt before it, whispering the chant. He left before nightfall, and then came the firelight again, this time not from abbey or well, but from a camp deep in the forest, 3 nights west of the borderlands. He'd meant only to rest nearby, to avoid the roads, but the smoke lured him. Something about it smelled familiar. Wormwood and fennel. Cassian. Of course, he sat beside the flames, roasting something that hissed with silver grease. He didn't look up when Milo arrived. "You've worn the mask longer than your own face," Cassian said quietly. "Does it help?" "No," Milo replied. "But you still wear it. It's not for me." Cassian nodded. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the cracking of kindling and the quiet hum of night insects. Then Cassian reached into his satchel and pulled out a scroll. Not the scroll, but another, newer, smaller. He handed it to Milo without explanation. Inside, a drawing. A tree, but not with leaves, with faces. Each branch carried a mask, different shapes, eyes open, mouths sealed. The trunk was black, the roots curled into the ground like writing. At the base, a phrase in unfamiliar script. "Truth wears masks because belief is contagious." "What is this?" Milo asked. "An echo," Cassian said, "of what came before, another scroll." "Not quite, but similar enough. They're appearing again, everywhere." "How?" "They're not spreading," Cassian said. And this time, he met Milo's eyes. They're remembering. A historical oddity. Some apothecaries in 15th century Naples claimed alchemical texts regrew if buried in fertile soil. One account tells of a leather-bound grimoire, sprouting like a plant after being burned, its roots entwined with crushed silver ore. The surviving page reportedly read, "Ink lives longer than truth." Most dismissed it as metaphor. Fringe historians think otherwise. Milo burned the mask that night, watched it curl and blacken in Cassian's fire. Then he turned to the older man. "How do I stop it?" "You can't," Cassian said. "Then why follow me?" "To remember what forgetting costs." Milo nodded, and walked into the next town unmasked. They chased him out before nightfall. Not because they recognized him, but because the priest felt uneasy, said the boy carried shadows in his breath. That the church bells rang wrong when he passed beneath the steeple. No one touched him, but they watched him leave with torches in hand. He didn't run, he simply walked, until the torches turned to stars. That night, a child followed him, barefoot, quiet, no older than 6. She never spoke, just stared up at him with wide eyes the color of dull pewter. He asked her name. She said nothing, just reached into her satchel and pulled out a single coin, pressed it into his palm. It was warm, still soft, still becoming. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. She pointed west, then vanished into the trees. Milo didn't sleep that night. He sat by a cold river, a clean one, still clear, and turned the coin over in his hands. It didn't reflect his face, just flickers. A well, a scroll, a chant, a mask, the elements of a story he could no longer claim as his own. It had moved beyond him, taken on shape in rumor, in fable, in fear. People worshipped it, feared it, sought it, and he, its unwilling origin, now wore a new name, whispered in taverns, the Silver Ghost. In a town he'd never seen, a woman carved a statue of him from driftwood and bone. She'd never met him. She didn't know his voice, but the statue's mouth was closed. Its eyes were made of coin, and in its chest, hollowed carefully. He stood at the edge of the ruined orchard, breath curling in the morning air. The trees around him were bare, gnarled things, once heavy with plums and pears. Now their bark flaked silver like old paint, and their roots cracked the soil in geometric patterns, like veins drawn by an impatient artist. He'd walked for days to reach this place, not because it was special, but because it had once been home to a man who claimed to be an alchemist, long dead, buried under a crumbled hut. Milo didn't come for guidance. He came for what the man left behind. In a collapsed cellar beneath rusted tools and mouse-bitten scrolls, he found it, a sphere, no bigger than an apple, smooth, perfect, and silver, but not like the well water. This shimmered in pulses, like breath, like a heartbeat. He picked it up and held it to his ear. No sound, but a pressure, like a thought, trying to form. He didn't speak, didn't blink. He just whispered, "I remember," and the sphere hummed. He built the circle carefully, not in blood, not in fire, but in pattern. Salt, chalk, ash, the last drop of royal mercury. In the middle, the sphere. Around it, masks, dozens of them, carved from wood, stone, clay, collected over years of wandering, each one a face he had worn, or feared, or become. He placed the newest last. It bore no mouth, only a mirrored surface. His reflection stared back, eyes too old for a boy, too human for a god. He stepped into the circle and began the chant. Not their chant, his. It wasn't beautiful. It cracked. It faltered, but it was true. He told the silver the story, not the one it wanted, the one it forgot, of a stable boy who read too far, who meant well, who didn't ask to become a vessel, who bled not from sin but from wonder, who refused to vanish. The sphere split, not in halves, into petals, each one unfolded like metal origami, revealing a core of black stone, smooth and silent. The silver hissed, the masks trembled, the ground pulsed once, then went still, and the masks began to melt, quietly, gracefully, their features blurred, their mouths faded, their eyes sealed, until there was nothing left but soft, formless ash. A theory among fringe alchemical scholars, the final transmutation is not of matter but of memory, that to survive a great change is not to become immortal but forgettable, that the true philosopher's stone is obscurity. Historians still argue if such a transformation is death or mercy. Milo emerged from the orchard different, not visibly. His eyes still saw, his hands still held, but people no longer stared. No one flinched when he passed. They didn't whisper, didn't kneel, didn't recognize. The silver ghost was gone, just a traveler remained. He crossed rivers that shimmered faintly, but no longer poisoned. He slept in towns where the chant had never reached. He drank from wells without flinching, and when he looked into water, it showed his face. Not glowing, not mirrored, just tired, alive. He walked until walking no longer felt like escape, and then he stopped. At a place with no name, built a home with no door, and planted a seed in the soil, not silver, just peach, and waited. They say, on rare twilight evenings, a soft figure tends to the orchard near the mountain's shadow. No one knows his name, he wears no mask, he says little, but if you speak a certain chant, 3 syllables long forgotten, it doesn't echo, it vanishes. And the figure smiles, and the peach trees bloom. The village is gone now. Not vanished, not buried, just forgotten. The well sits where it always has, though time has collapsed its stone edge and vines have swallowed the rim. The silver no longer rises, the chant is no longer heard, but still people avoid it. They say the air smells strange there, like tin and thunder, that the birds won't perch near its mouth, that travelers who camp too close wake with dreams they don't remember, only the feeling of metal pressed against their chest, and some swear they've seen him, at dusk when the fog rolls in low, and the sky turns the colour of bruised lavender, a figure appears by the ruined fountain, not walking, not moving, just there. He wears no shoes, his clothes are plain, but his eyes, if you dare meet them, shine faintly, not with fire, not with magic, with memory, because even if the bloom is buried, it remembers him. In the capital, the silver ban remains, all coinage melted and recast in iron, alchemy is outlawed, scrolls are burned upon discovery, the word transmutation is cause enough for exile, but still people whisper, in markets and taverns and at the edge of their prayers, of a boy who made water turn silver, of a village swallowed by its own miracle, of a chant no one teaches, but everyone seems to know. It's just a story now, a bedtime tale, the boy who turned water into silver, meant to scare children, or maybe comfort them. Depending on the telling, deep in the hills, the orchard thrives. The peaches are strange, silver pink with a soft glow that fades at first touch. Birds return now, bees hum through the leaves. The soil is dark and warm, and in its centre sits a stone, smooth black and carved with one word. Milo. No dates, no epitaph, just a name. Some say he's still there, tending the roots. Others say he turned into a tree himself. No one agrees, but everyone believes, a little. And if you walk far enough through bramble and fog and time itself, you might come to the edge of a silver stream. It won't reflect your face, only what you've forgotten. Look too long, and it begins to show things you didn't mean to remember. And standing at the edge, a figure waits, wrapped in mist. Eyes closed, not ghost, not boy, just a seed, dormant, quiet, remembering. The orchard is still. The sky has dimmed to soft ash blue, and a hush settles over the hills as if the earth itself has exhaled. The story is over now, folded up like a worn parchment, its edges a little crinkled, its words lingering gently at the edges of your thoughts. You're safe, whatever shimmered behind your eyes as you listened. It's fading now. The chant has quieted, the well has gone still. The silver bloom has receded back into the soil, into the memory of a story only half believed, half forgotten. The boy, just a boy again, rests beneath the peach tree, and the world no longer asks anything of him. Let that peace reaches you. Let it slip through the cracks in your day, into the spaces behind your ribs, through your shoulders, your jaw. Every part of you can soften now. You're not the vessel. You're not the spark. You're just here, listening, breathing. Let your thoughts move like that silver river, smooth, slow, aimless. Whatever you carried with you into this story, you can set it down now. No chant, no ritual, just rest. And when your eyes close, maybe you'll see that orchard. Maybe you'll walk its soft soil. And maybe, just maybe, you'll meet the boy, not glowing, not haunted, just tending the roots, offering you a peach, letting you stay a while. Because sleep is a kind of transmutation too, isn't it? A soft changing of the self, a quiet becoming. So let yourself become still. Let the well go dark. Let the masks melt away. Good night.